Hi, everybody. Okay, so we're going to start a new chapter. This one is about energy and the energy that you need to stay alive. So if you take a look, what we have right here is a cell, an animal cell, and a plant cell. And the arrows are pointing to the organelle that is going to be of key significance here. And that, with the squiggly line inside, is the mitochondrion. One is a mitochondrion. We've got two mitochondria shown here. We're also actually going to be referencing the cytoplasm, which is really important to this as well. The mitochondria are for respiration. That is breaking sugar down to get energy. And that's what this chapter is partly about, and where we'll start. Okay, so respiration, release of chemical energy from glucose, sugar. Okay, chemical energy. That's just a term you probably have no idea what that means. There's all kinds of energy, right? You can feel really energetic and want to run around, and you can say that cars have energy because they're in motion, and there's different kinds of energy out there. Chemical energy is a very, very specific kind. It's the kind in the bonds. So between this H and this C, it takes energy to hold those together. And if you can break that, you can release energy. There's another kind of energy in this molecule, which is nuclear energy. If we took an atom of hydrogen and split it, we'd release a lot of energy because there's a lot of energy to hold that one atom together. We are not touching that in this. We are talking about not the energy inside of an atom, but the energy between atoms that holds them together, and that's called chemical energy. So we're going to be looking at chemical energy. As we break these bonds, we can get energy out of it. So if you can take a glucose molecule and bust it apart, you'll get plenty of energy. And every time you break a bond, you will get more energy. If you break a whole bunch of them, you'll get a whole lot. If you break only a couple, you'll get just a little bit of energy. So breaking bonds releases energy that's in the bonds, and that's what we do. When we eat, we get our food, and when we break it down into sugar so it can fit in our cells, we bring it into our cells, and we get them in there, and then we start tearing apart the bonds and releasing energy. So one of the things that we have to pay attention to here is that we want to do this slowly. If you break all the bonds at once, you are going to get fire. You're going to release so much energy at once, you're going to go, right? And you would burst into flames, right? You don't want to release all the energy at once. So respiration is very, very careful about breaking the bonds little by little by little to release the energy slowly. And you trap that energy every time you bust up a bond. You trap that energy in a molecule that we'll refer to as ATP. We'll consider it like a battery. We're going to take apart the bonds and transfer the energy from the bonds and put it in this molecule ATP. More about that in a moment, okay? And then some of the energy isn't trapped in this ATPs that we'll talk about in a moment. Some of it is actually released as heat, but just a little. We don't explode into flames. We don't spontaneously combust, but we do release some of it as heat. So as we break these bonds, we try to trap it in ATP, but some of it is released as heat, which is why we can stay warm on a winter day. It's why if you do infrared and you look at the heat coming off of warm blooded animals, you can see a lot of heat. That's because they're breaking their food and releasing heat, but they're doing it just slowly enough so they don't burst into flames. They just release some as heat to keep themselves warm, and the rest is trapped as ATP for life activities, the battery that we're going to talk about. So I'm going to talk about that now. This right here is a representation of an ATP molecule. ATP is actually a very complicated molecule. It has several pieces though. We have our base, we have a sugar, you can see the ring, right? It's just like a sugar that we talked about. And then it has these things called phosphate groups. And these are bonds connecting those sections. And then these little squigglies are bonds too. So there's energy. There's energy in this bond, there's energy in this bond, there's energy in these. But these are drawn special. They're drawn with squiggles because they're high energy bonds. They hold extra energy. They're like super energetic bonds. Lots of chemical energy bond in here rather than just a lower amount here. There's two versions of this molecule. You can have the base, the sugar, and two phosphates with another phosphate floating along separate. Or you can have all 3 phosphates hooked together with the sugar and the base. Which one has more energy contained in it? Well, this one only has 1 high energy bond. This one has 2. This one's a very high energy version of the molecule. And the one at the top is was a much lower energy version. And so we have here our uncharged version. If we have a base and a sugar and 2 phosphates together, and we don't have that 3rd phosphate bonded, we have a lower energy molecule. It's like it's uncharged. It's like a battery that has used up its energy. Oops. And if we have all 3 together and we have this high energy bond, it's like it's a charged battery. And this one is called ADP, and this one is called ATP. Why is this one called ADP and this one TP? What do you think the D and the P stand for? Diphosphate. So this whole thing right here is called adenosine. That's what the A is for. And then diphosphate for 2 phosphates. And adenosine triphosphate for 3 phosphates. So the uncharged version is ADP and the charged version is ATP. So if you take an ADP and a P and you get energy from somewhere, you can turn it into ATP. Well, where's that energy going to come from? Well, you have these ADPs and Ps floating around in your cells. And when you break down sugar slowly and you release energy, like here, as you release the energy, you can trap that energy from your food and put it into the bonds that make ADP and P come together to make an ATP. So you eat, you bring the food to your cells, you tear apart all those bonds, and as you do that, you transfer the energy from there into the bond that connects the P and the ADP. And you've charged up the battery. You've taken it's like your food is like the electricity in the plug, right? And it's like your phone, you're charging it up, right? When you plug into the food. So you break down your sugar that you've eaten from respiration, you break down those bonds, and you use that energy to connect the P's to the ADPs and make ATP. And then the ATPs go around the cell and they break apart that high energy bond, returning it to ADP and P, and you use that energy for life activities. So respiration is really just a transfer of the energy from glucose bonds, which is not very useful in your body. It's like a lousy way to hold the energy. And you take the energy by breaking down those bonds in the sugar and putting it, storing it in these ATPs so that when you go to do stuff, the ATPs can have the energy. It's the cell's understanding of energy. It knows how to use the energy in ATP. It doesn't know how to use the energy in glucose. So this entire process is about taking the energy out of the bonds of sugar and simply transferring it into bonds in the high energy ATP molecule so that you can do stuff. All the things that you do, like active transport, like thinking, talking, and running, and breathing, and your heart beating, all those things, that requires ATP. And when you go to do those, you rip off that P, and the energy is released so you can go do things. And then the P and the ADP are floating around. So you bring in more food, you break those bonds so that you can shove them back together and make ATP. And then the ATPs go so you can run and do stuff, and you take it off and the energy comes out so you can do the stuff. And then you eat some more so you can shove the P back on there. And it's just a cycle that goes on and on, making sure to fuel all of your life activities.